3 in the morning. Richard arrived at his mansion after a long trip. He turned on the light in the living room and froze. His housekeeper was sleeping on the cold marble floor. Beside her, 2 small children trembled under thin blankets. "What does this mean?" he shouted, furious. "I gave you a perfectly good room." But her answer left him speechless, and what he discovered later would change his life forever. Like this, if you want to know what really happened. It is more than a click. It is saying, "I also want to understand." Comment on how you think this story is going to end, and if you have not subscribed yet, it costs you nothing, but for us, it means the world. Thank you for being here. The rain hit the mansion's windows with a monotonous, almost hypnotic insistence. Richard Sterling closed the garage door harder than needed, making the echo reverberate in the stone walls. 3 in the morning. The trip from New York had been endless. Deserted highways, thick fog, and that bitter taste in the mouth left by meetings with investors who understood nothing about construction, but had an opinion on everything. He dropped the Italian leather briefcase on the marble floor of the foyer. The mansion in Connecticut was immersed in the characteristic silence of large empty houses, that silence that was not absence of noise, but presence of loneliness. But something was out of place. A faint, almost ghostly light filtered from the living room. Richard frowned. He had left clear orders. All lights off by 11 at night. The waste of electricity was something he would not tolerate, not even in his own house. He approached with heavy steps, still with his soaked cashmere coat dripping onto the floor. What he saw upon entering left him completely motionless. In the center of the living room, on the travertine marble floor that had cost a fortune to import from Italy, there were 3 bodies huddled under thin blankets, visibly inadequate for the cold. Clara Jones, his housekeeper, slept in a fetal position, one arm extended protecting 2 small children who trembled even in their sleep. The children, they must have been 4 or 5 years old, had rosy cheeks, slightly blue lips, and breathed with that broken cadence of someone sleeping badly. Richard's heart pounded, but not out of compassion. It was outrage, cold fury. "Clara!" His voice boomed in the living room like thunder. The woman woke up startled, her eyes wide, and her first instinct was to hug the children, pulling them toward her chest as if someone was going to snatch them away. The little one started to cry. "Mr. Richard, I can explain." "Then explain." His voice was harsh, sharp as a knife's edge. "What does this mean? I gave you a perfectly adequate room. A room with a bed, closet, private bathroom, and you are sleeping on my living room floor like... Clara stood up slowly. She was 34 years old, but at that moment she looked older. She wore worn pajamas, mended at the elbows and frayed slippers, but there was something in her posture, in the way she held Richard's gaze, that disconcerted him. "Like poor?" Clara completed the sentence with a calmness that contrasted with the trembling of her hands. "Because that is what we are, sir. Poor. And your living room floor is warmer than my room." Richard let out a dry, incredulous laugh. "Impossible. This house has central heating in every room. It cost $30,000 to install the radiant system. Do you think I am stingy?" "I do not think anything, sir. I only know what I live every night." "Then you are the one with a problem. The heating works perfectly." Clara took a deep breath. Her children clung to her waist, sobbing quietly. "Check the project, sir. The staff room is not connected to the system." Richard grabbed his tablet from the side table with abrupt movements. His fingers moved quickly over the screen, looking for the digital blueprints of the mansion. He had personally supervised that construction 3 years ago, when he still considered himself meticulous with details. He found the file and enlarged the image of the second floor. The silence that followed was dense, almost tangible. There it was, in blue and red lines that he himself had approved. The radiant heating pipe network ran through the entire house like a circulatory system, bringing heat to every room, every hallway, every bathroom. But it stopped abruptly before reaching the staff area. The architect had drawn a dashed line with a note in the margin. "Staff area excluded from the system for cost optimization. Approved 03/15/2022. Richard felt the blood rush to his face. He had signed that change without really reading it, trusting the judgment of the award-winning architect he had hired. Cost optimization was a phrase that always sounded good to his ears. "Sir," Clara spoke in a low voice, "I informed you of this 3 times. The first time in September, when the cold nights began. You told me it was impossible and that I had probably left the window open. The second time in October, when Matthew got bronchitis. You said that children nowadays are weak and that I was exaggerating. The third time, when was the third time? Richard's voice came out lower than he intended. The day Lucas turned 4. I asked for permission to take them to the doctor because they both had a fever. You told me I should get used to it, that there were people who lived in worse conditions, and that I should be grateful. The words fell on Richard like stones. He did not remember those conversations specifically, but he recognized the tone, the attitude. It was exactly the kind of thing he would say when he was busy, when the problems of the help seemed trivialities compared to his million-dollar concerns. The children stopped crying and were now watching him with big, dark eyes, full of a fear that churned his stomach. "Why did you not leave?" Richard asked. "If the conditions were so bad, why did you stay?" Clara smiled sadly. "Because I need this job. Because I do not have family or references or papers that allow me to work elsewhere. Because my children need to eat every day. And because—" She paused, looking at her little ones. "Because your living room floor, Mr. Richard, is indeed warmer than any other place we could go." Richard did not sleep that night. Sitting in his office overlooking the garden, he watched the rain fall on the rose bushes that never bloomed well. At 6 in the morning, when the sky was just beginning to lighten with grey tones, he picked up the phone and called James Miller, his company's chief engineer. "James, I need you to come to my house. Now." "Now?" "Richard, it is 6 in the morning. Now means now. And bring the thermography equipment." At 8, 3 engineers were walking through the mansion with thermal cameras, humidity meters and ambient temperature readers. Richard followed them in silence, arms crossed, watching the technicians frown as they examined the staff room. Clara had taken the children to the garden. From the window, Richard could see them playing among the trees, wearing coats that were clearly 2 sizes too big, probably bought second-hand. Matthew, the older one, took care of Lucas with a tenderness that seemed too mature for his age. "Mr. Sterling," James's voice pulled him out of his thoughts. The engineer held a tablet with colored graphs. "You have to see this." The thermal images showed the house as a heat map, intense reds and oranges throughout the structure, indicating a pleasant temperature. But the staff room was a dark blue, almost black rectangle, 8 degrees Celsius. "It is uninhabitable," James said bluntly. "There is moisture in the walls, probably condensation due to the thermal contrast. That generates mold. Look here." He pointed to a corner where a greenish stain was indeed growing. "This is toxic, Richard, especially for children. How is it possible that I did not?" "No, because you never went in here, and because—" James hesitated. "Because it is the staff room. I do not know who designed this, but they deliberately excluded this area, probably to save a few $1,000s. $3,400, Richard murmured, remembering the figure from the project. "I saved $3,400. The technical report was devastating in its precision. Room unsuitable for human residence. Average nightly temperature, 69 $. Relative humidity, 85%. Presence of potentially harmful mold spores. Risk of respiratory diseases and dermatological conditions. Recommendation, immediate evacuation." Richard read the document 3 times, each word settling in his consciousness like a lead weight. That afternoon, Richard sent for Clara to come to his office. He had spent hours preparing what he would say, how he would say it. He had ordered one of the guest rooms on the 2nd floor to be prepared, a spacious room with an ensuite bathroom, garden view, and, of course, perfectly working radiant heating. Clara entered with the children holding her hand. She was wearing her work uniform, a grey dress with a white apron, and her hair was pulled back in a practical braid. Her eyes, however, did not show the submission Richard expected. There was something different about her, as if during the night she had made an irreversible decision. "Clara, I want to apologize," Richard began, the words coming out with difficulty. He was not used to asking for forgiveness. "I did not pay attention to your living conditions. It was unforgivable." She did not respond, just waited. "I have prepared a guest room for you and the children. It is spacious, warm, has everything you need, and—" He paused, trying to find the right words. "I will increase your salary by 20%. No, by 30. And I will pay for all the medical consultations you need. Clara looked at him for a long time. Her children remained silent by her side like two small statues. No, sir. Richard blinked, confused. No? I am leaving. Today. Her voice was firm, without a trace of doubt. My children deserve more than this. But Clara, I'm offering you a better room, more money. What else do you want? Dignity. The word fell between them like a sentence. I want my children to grow up knowing that their mother is worth something. And here, Mr. Richard, I learned that for you, I am worth less than the $3,400 you saved on heating. That is not true. It was a mistake. I can compensate for it. Money does not solve everything, sir. Clara approached the desk and placed a worn folder with bent corners and coffee stains. But before I leave, I have to tell you something, for your own good. She opened the folder and began to spread documents on the mahogany desk. Hand-drawn architectural plans, structural calculations written in tiny handwriting, photographs taken with an old, low-resolution cell phone, and what appeared to be meticulously detailed technical reports. Richard looked at the papers without understanding. What is this? For 3 years, sir, while cleaning this house, I studied it. Every inch, every beam, every column. Clara pointed to one of the plans where she had marked a specific area in red. And I discovered something that should worry you much more than the cold in my room. What are you talking about? Clara looked him directly in the eyes. Mr. Richard, you are living on a time bomb, and if you do not do something soon, this beautiful mansion that you love so much will come down. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, crossed his arms, and managed a condescending smile. It was the same expression he used when an inexperienced subordinate tried to explain to him how he should manage his business. Clara, I appreciate your concern, but this house was designed by Gustavo Ferrer, one of the most prestigious architects in Spain. It was built by my own company, with the best materials. It had 4 municipal inspections. And you want to tell me there is a structural problem? Yes, sir. You? A housekeeper? Clara did not flinch at the tone. A housekeeper who was a civil engineer for 8 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Clara Jones, the woman who cleaned his bathrooms, prepared his coffee, washed his clothes. She had always been there, always quiet, always invisible. An engineer, that is impossible. If you were an engineer, why would you be working here? Because the company where I worked went bankrupt 4 years ago. Because when that happened, Clara looked at her children, who were playing with blocks in the corner of the office. I got pregnant. Alone. Without family. The savings ran out in 6 months. I sent 100 resumes. 50 told me I did not have enough experience. 40 more asked who would take care of the children. The last 10 offered me salaries that were not enough to live on. She sat down without being offered a seat, something she had never done before. So I accepted cleaning houses, because my children need to eat, because a university degree is worth nothing when you have bills to pay and 2 mouths to feed. Richard felt uncomfortable, as if he were seeing something he should not see, hearing something too intimate. Even so, how can you be sure there is a structural problem? Clara took one of the plans and spread it on the desk. Do you see this main beam? The one that runs across the entire dining room ceiling. It is made of rolled steel, IPN 400 profile. It should support the load of the second floor without problems. And it has a longitudinal fissure. It started as a microfracture about 2 years ago. It now measures 22 centimeters long and goes through 30% of the beam's thickness. Richard leaned over the plan, examining the precise annotations, the stress calculations, the bending moment diagrams. It was a professional job, too professional to be invented. How do you know the fissure is 22 centimeters? Because I go up to the attic space every 3 months to measure it. I keep a photographic and chronological record. Clara pulled out a small notebook where she had glued tiny photos, each with a date and measurements noted. The fissure is growing progressively. At this rate, in 6 months, it will reach the critical point. And what will happen then? The beam will yield. The dining room ceiling will collapse, and if there is anyone there— She did not finish the sentence. Richard felt a chill run down his spine. The dining room, where he ate dinner every night, where he received important clients, where only 2 weeks ago he had hosted a dinner for 20 investors. Why did you not tell me before? I told you, sir. A year ago. You were reviewing some plans and I mentioned that the dining room beam worried me. You told me I did not know what I was talking about and to keep mopping. Richard closed his eyes. He could perfectly imagine the scene. Clara trying to speak, him cutting her off with an impatient gesture. The automatic contempt for anything that came from the help. The next day at 7 in the morning, a complete team of structural engineers invaded the mansion. Richard had hired the best, advanced engineering techniques, the firm that evaluated historic buildings and skyscrapers. He did not want second opinions of dubious quality. Clara watched from the kitchen as the technicians deployed sophisticated equipment, ultrasonics, vibration meters, crack scanners. The chief engineer, a 60-year-old man named Stephen Ruiz, first reviewed the documents Clara had prepared. "Who did these calculations?" he asked with a frown. "I did," Clara replied simply. The man looked her up and down, noticing the housekeeper's uniform. "Are you an engineer?" "I was." "Well, these calculations are correct, and worrying." He turned to Richard. "We are going to verify, but if she is right..." 3 hours later, Stephen came down from the attic with a serious expression. His hands were covered in dust, and he held a tablet full of data and photographs. Richard, who had been pacing the house unable to concentrate on anything, approached quickly. "Well, Ms. Clara is right. Absolutely right." Stephen showed an enlarged image on the screen. "The fissure is real and is in a critical state. I do not understand how this went unnoticed in the initial inspections. How serious is it?" "Very serious. The beam is supporting approximately 18 tons of load. When the fissure reaches 45% of the thickness, and according to Ms. Clara's projections, that will happen in 5 or 6 months, the structural resistance will fall below the minimum safety factor." Richard felt his legs shaking. "What do I have to do?" "Reinforce the beam immediately. And by the way, check the entire structure because if there is an error of this caliber, there may be more." Stephen paused. "This is going to cost money." "How much?" "Between repair, reinforcement, and a complete building check. I calculate about $800,000, maybe $1 million. Richard leaned against the wall. $1 million. For an error that neither he nor his architects nor his engineers had detected. An error that his housekeeper, his ex-housekeeper, had discovered while cleaning. Stephen put away his tablet and handed him a preliminary report. "Mr. Sterling, I do not know who this woman is, but she just saved your life, yours and probably several other people's." When the engineers left, Richard found Clara in the garden with the children. They were collecting their few belongings. Clothes folded in an old suitcase, toys stored in a supermarket bag, a couple of children's books with worn covers. "Clara, wait." She straightened up, but did not look at him. "Yes, sir?" "You were right. About everything. About the beam. About the fissure, about everything." The words came out with difficulty. "The engineers confirmed every detail. I am glad I was useful to you, sir. Clara, you cannot leave like this. You saved me from a catastrophe. I just did the right thing. Let me compensate you. I can offer you a job at my company. As an engineer with a real salary, benefits, a formal contract." Clara finally looked at him. There were tears in her eyes, but also a steely determination. "Why, Mr. Richard?" "Because you discovered that I can be useful to you. Because now that you know I have a university degree, I am worth more than when I was just cleaning your floors." "That is not it." "Then what is it?" 2 days ago, when I was sleeping on the floor with my children trembling from the cold, where was this offer? When I told you there was a structural problem and you ignored me, where was your respect?" Richard had no answer, because she was right, completely right. Richard did not sleep that night. He sat in the dining room, that same room that could have killed him, watching the ceiling beam. Now that he knew where to look, he could see a faint shadow, an almost imperceptible irregularity in the white painted steel. How easy it had been not to see it. How easy it was not to see anything when one decided that certain things, certain people, did not deserve attention. He thought of Clara. In 3 years working in his house, how many times had he really talked to her? 10, 20. They were always brief instructions, complaints about some detail, impatient comments when she tried to say something. He had never asked her about her life, her history, her dreams. She was just the girl who cleans, invisible, expendable, until she ceased to be. At 2 in the morning, with a glass of whiskey in his hand, Richard took out his laptop and started searching. Clara Jones, civil engineer. He did not expect to find anything, but there it was, an article from 2018 in an architecture magazine. Young structural engineering talent receives award for innovative design. The photo showed a younger Clara, with her hair loose and a radiant smile, holding a trophy. Behind her, the blueprints for a pedestrian bridge she herself had designed. He kept looking. More articles. A master's thesis on optimization of steel structures in medium-height buildings, technical publications. An interview where she spoke passionately about the beauty of mathematics applied to construction. What had happened? How had this brilliant woman, this award-winning engineer, ended up cleaning his house for a miserable salary? He found the answer in an article in the economic newspaper from 2021, Jones and Sons Construction Files for Bankruptcy After Corruption Scandal. The article explained that the family company where Clara worked had been involved in a bribery case. Although Clara was not accused of anything, the company closed and she lost her job. The article included a photo of Clara leaving the courthouse 7 months pregnant, with an expression of absolute devastation. Richard closed the laptop, feeling a weight on his chest. He had seen the pregnancy, of course. When Clara came looking for work, she was visibly pregnant. He had hesitated to hire her, but he urgently needed someone and she had accepted a low salary. A practical solution. He got up and walked to the large window overlooking the garden. Dawn was beginning to paint the sky pink and orange. Somewhere in the city, Clara and her children would be sleeping. Where, in what conditions? Would they have found a place that at least had heating? The children, Matthew and Lucas. Something in the way they had looked at him the other night, with those big dark eyes, had unsettled him. There was something familiar in their faces, in the shape of their eyebrows, in the line of their jaws. He picked up his phone and looked for his photos. Photos of his own childhood, the few he kept. He stopped at one of himself at age 5 in his parents' garden. The similarity was impossible to ignore. The same eyes, the same mouth, the same way of tilting his head. His heart pounded. It could not be, or it could. He vaguely remembered that night, 4.5 years ago. Clara had just started working for him. She was desperate, vulnerable. He had been drinking after a difficult breakup. She had stayed late finishing cleaning. There was a conversation, more alcohol, mutual comfort that led to something that should not have happened. The next day he acted as if nothing had happened, as if she were invisible again, as if that night did not exist. Was it possible that Richard spent the next 2 days like a man possessed? He hired a private investigator, not to spy on Clara, but to find her. The city was big, but she could not have gone far without money. The investigator located her in a cheap hostel near the bus station. A shared room with 2 other families, collective showers, makeshift kitchen in a hallway. He did not go there. He knew appearing would be an intolerable invasion. Instead, he sent a message through the hostel owner. "I need to talk to you. Just talk, please." Clara did not respond for 2 days. Finally, she agreed to meet at a neutral cafe, away from the mansion, away from everything that represented their previous relationship. Richard arrived half an hour early, nervous, mentally rehearsing what he would say. When Clara entered, she was wearing different clothes, clean but worn. Jeans, a second-hand jacket, her hair loose for the first time since he had known her. Without the housekeeper's uniform, she looked like a different person. Younger, stronger, more herself. She sat across from him without greeting him. "Thank you for coming," Richard began. "I have 20 minutes. The children are with the neighbor at the hostel. Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." She looked him straight in the eye. "I have always been honest with you, Mr. Richard. It is you who has not wanted to listen. The children," his throat closed up. "Matthew and Lucas, are they yours?" Clara finished the question with a calmness he did not expect. "Yes, they are your sons." The world seemed to stop. Richard had expected that answer, but hearing it out loud was different. "Why did you never tell me?" "I told you?" "What?" "When I discovered I was pregnant, almost 5 years ago, I came to your office. I told you I needed to talk about something important. You interrupted me, saying you had a meeting and to come back another day. I came back a week later. You told me you did not have time for personal dramas. I came back a month later, already with a noticeable belly. You looked at me, and I knew at that moment that you knew. that you understood and that you had decided not to know. So I stopped trying. Every word was a stab. Richard ran his hands over his face. My God, how could I have been so blind, cowardly? Clara had not raised her voice, but there was steel in her words. You did not want to see it. It was easier to pretend that night never existed. It was easier for me to remain simply the employee. How did you survive? The pregnancy, the small children, working, like thousands of women survive every day, without help, without recognition, doing the impossible because the alternative is worse. She leaned forward. Do you know what the funniest thing is, Mr. Richard? During those 3 years, while raising your children alone while working in your house, you ate dinner in that dining room every night. Your children saw you through the window. Matthew asked me, Mom, who is that man? And I told him, he is my boss. He is important. He is very busy. I never told them the truth because I thought it would be crueler to know that their father deliberately ignored them. Richard felt tears burning in his eyes. Clara, I am sorry. I am so sorry. Your apologies do not change anything. Then let me change something. Let me help. Be a part of their lives. I want to meet them. I want them to have what they deserve. What do they deserve? Your money. You already tried to buy me with money. It did not work. It is not just money. It is responsibility. It is doing the right thing. Clara remained silent for a long moment, watching her untouched coffee. Why now? Because you discovered I am an engineer? Because I saved you from an accident? Or because you finally realized you have children? Because of all three. Because of everything. Because I saw my children sleeping on the cold floor and I finally woke up. Richard took a deep breath. Because I was a coward and blind. But I do not want to continue being one. The days that followed were awkward, full of difficult conversations and even more difficult silences. Clara accepted that Richard meet the children, but under clear conditions. No excessive gifts, no promises he could not keep, no playing at being a father when it suited him. The first meeting was in a public park. Richard arrived empty-handed as Clara had requested, feeling useless and out of place. Matthew and Lucas played on the swings, oblivious to the importance of the moment. They were beautiful children, with a bright intelligence shining in their eyes, dark hair messed up by the wind, laughter that sounded like little bells. Children, come, Clara called. They came running, curious but cautious. This is Mr. Richard. He is someone important. To us. Matthew, the older one, studied him with the penetrating gaze of a child who has already learned to distrust. Is that why we slept in your living room? The direct question left him speechless. Yes, and I am very sorry. Do you have heating in our room now? Asked Lucas, the little one, with devastating innocence. You do not live there anymore, darling. Clara intervened gently. Why not? Because we deserve a better place. Richard knelt down to be at the children's height. You are right. I made a very big mistake. And I am here because I want to meet you, because, how to say it, how to explain something so complex to 2 small children. Because I am your dad. Lucas looked confused. I thought we did not have a dad. Me too, said Matthew, with that premature seriousness that breaks the heart. During the next hour, Richard played with them awkwardly, not knowing well how to interact with children. He pushed them on the swings too high, built a sandcastle that immediately collapsed, tried to teach them a game that was too complicated, but they laughed at his failed attempts, and that somehow was perfect. Clara watched from a bench, arms crossed, her expression impossible to read. When Richard approached to say goodbye, she told him in a low voice, Do not break their hearts, they have suffered enough. I will not, I promise. Promises are easy, Mr. Richard. Actions are what count. A week later, Richard called an extraordinary meeting at the headquarters of Sterling and Vega Construction. It was not an ordinary business meeting. He had summoned the 12 main managers, the associate architects, and the chief engineers. The conference room was tense with expectation. Thank you for coming, Richard began, standing in front of the large boardroom table. I have gathered you because I have to tell you something that deeply embarrasses me. Those present exchanged confused glances. 3 weeks ago, my housekeeper was sleeping on my living room floor with her 2 small children because the room I assigned her did not have heating. When I finally paid attention, I discovered that she had lived in inhuman conditions for 3 years, under my roof. with my implicit knowledge. The silence was absolute. But that is not all. That same woman, while cleaning my house, discovered a critical structural failure that none of our engineers detected. A failure that could have caused a catastrophic collapse. She is a civil engineer, a highly qualified professional who worked for me for a miserable salary because it was the only thing she found. James Miller, the chief engineer, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This made me wonder, Richard continued. How many people on our construction sites are in similar situations? How many qualified workers are doing tasks below their capacity because we assume they are not worth more? How many live in deplorable conditions while building mansions for others? Richard, where are you going with this? Asked Thomas Silver, the financial director. I want to change how we operate, completely. Richard activated a presentation on the screen. I propose a comprehensive program, decent wages for all levels, guaranteed adequate housing, review of working conditions, and a system where people can grow based on their ability, not their initial position. That will cost millions, Thomas objected, and it will make us better, more efficient, more human. Richard switched to the next slide. I also propose hiring Clara Jones as Deputy Technical Director, with a competitive salary and access to all projects. The housekeeper. The question came from Monica Herrera, the principal architect, in an incredulous tone. The civil engineer who saved us from a disaster, and who has more integrity than many of us combined, Richard corrected firmly. The discussion was heated. Some supported the idea immediately. Others considered it idealistic and impractical. Thomas presented numbers that showed how costs would increase. Richard countered with studies on productivity and talent retention. In the end, after 4 hours of debate, a vote was taken. 9 in favor, 3 against. The program would be implemented. That afternoon, Richard went to the hostel where Clara was still living. He knocked on the shared room door. When she opened it, with Lucas asleep in her arms and Matthew drawing on the floor, Richard felt a renewed pang of guilt. Can I come in? Clara hesitated, but finally nodded. The room was tiny, with 2 narrow beds, an open suitcase that served as a closet, and an electric burner in the corner. The contrast with his mansion was obscene. Clara, I have a proposal, and before you say no, listen to me completely. She looked at him cautiously but did not interrupt. I want to offer you a position in my company, Deputy Technical Director. You will supervise all structural projects with authority to approve or reject designs. Salary of $80,000. Annually to start, full health insurance for you and the children, permanent contract. Clara remained motionless, her expression inscrutable. But that is not all. I want you and the children to have a house. A real house, not a room in my mansion. There is an apartment in the new building we just finished. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, balcony overlooking the park. It is yours. No rent for the first year while you settle in. And what do you want in return? Clara finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. Nothing. Well, not nothing. I want you to give me the opportunity to meet my children, to be a part of their lives, but on your terms, at your pace, without pressure. Why should I trust you? You should not. I have given no reasons for you to trust me. Richard sat in the only available chair, but I am willing to earn that trust, day by day, action by action. As you said, promises are easy. Actions are what count. Clara looked at her children. Matthew had stopped drawing and was listening attentively, with those intelligent eyes that missed no detail. Lucas was still sleeping, clutching a mended teddy bear. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. But Clara, he paused. This is not charity. It is justice. It is what I should have done from the beginning. And selfishly, it is also what my company needs. You are too talented to be lost cleaning houses. 2 weeks later, Clara Jones entered the offices of Sterling and Vega Construction for the first time. As a professional employee, she wore a grey suit she had bought at a second-hand store, but that fit her impeccably. Her hair pulled back in a professional bun, a briefcase with her documents and credentials. Employees looked at her with ill-concealed curiosity. Some knew the whole story. Others had only heard rumors. The housekeeper who would now be a boss, the woman who had discovered a flaw everyone else missed, the single mother who had somehow captured the boss's attention. Richard personally greeted her in the lobby. Welcome. Thank you. Clara shook his hand formally, maintaining professional distance. He showed her to her office, a spacious corner on the third floor, with windows overlooking the city, a modern design desk, a state-of-the-art computer, and an empty bookshelf waiting to be filled. "It is too much," Clara murmured, observing the space. "It is what you deserve. James will bring you up to date on all active projects. You have complete authority to review, question, and modify any design you deem deficient." During the first few days, Clara worked in silence, studying each project with the same meticulousness with which she had examined Richard's mansion. She found problems, many problems: an apartment building with undersized beams, a pedestrian bridge with incorrect wind calculations, a school with inadequate foundations for the type of soil. In each case, she presented detailed reports with alternatives, solutions, and cost estimates. The architects initially resisted. "We have always done it this way," they protested. Clara responded with data, with regulations, with potential consequences. Eventually, they accepted her corrections. In the third week, during a project meeting, Monica Herrera, the architect who had objected to her hiring, publicly acknowledged, "Clara was right about the office building supports. If we had built according to my original design, there would have been problems in 5 years." It was a turning point. Slowly, the team began to see her not as an intruder, but as a valuable colleague. But the nights were different. Clara arrived at her new apartment, yes, she had finally accepted, where Matthew and Lucas awaited her with stories from school, drawings to show, impossible questions to answer. And once a week, Richard would come to visit them. The visits were cordial but tense. Richard brought dinner for everyone, played with the children, helped with homework. But between him and Clara, there was an abyss of history, of pain, of broken trust that was not easily repaired. 6 months later, the transformation was undeniable. Sterling and Vega Construction had implemented the full program of decent working conditions. Costs had increased, yes, but so had the quality of work. Inspections found fewer problems. Deadlines were met better. Workers stayed longer at the company, and Clara had become a central figure. Her reputation grew, the engineer who found problems no one else saw, the woman who had gone from cleaning to leadership, the professional who never compromised safety for convenience. One Friday afternoon, Richard called her to his office. Clara entered, expecting another project discussion, but found something different. Richard was by the window, looking at the city with a thoughtful expression. "Close the door, please." Clara obeyed, feeling the tension in the air. "You have been working here for 8 months, Richard began without turning around. "You have corrected 22 projects, saved 3 from near failure, and earned the respect of the entire team. Even Monica, who hated you at first, now says you are the best engineer she has worked with. Is there a problem?" "No, quite the opposite." He finally looked at her. "I want to make you principal technical director. James is retiring next year. The position is yours if you want it. $120,000 annually, profit sharing, company shares." Clara was speechless. It was more than she had ever dreamed of earning. "But there is something more important I want to tell you." Richard approached slowly. "These months seeing how you work, how you care for our children, how you rebuilt your life from scratch, Clara, I admire you deeply, and I am ashamed it took me so long to see it. Richard, no, let me finish. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness. I know I was cowardly, I was cruel, I was blind in every possible way, but you taught me something no university taught me, that a person's true value is not in their position or their bank account, but in their dignity, their integrity, their ability to do the right thing even when it is difficult." Clara felt tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. "Where are you going with this? I want you to know that I changed, not just at work, in everything. I have been visiting the sites, talking to the workers, listening to their stories. Everyone has a complex life, dreams, struggles, and I had reduced them to numbers on a spreadsheet. It is a good start, just a start." Clara smiled slightly. "True change is not measured in months, Richard. It is measured in years, in consistency, in whether you are still this person when you no longer feel guilty, when the initial impact wears off. You are right, as always." Richard took a deep breath. "Do you accept the position?" "I will think about it. It is a lot of responsibility. No one is more prepared than you." That night, when Richard arrived at her apartment for the weekly visit, he found something unexpected. The children had prepared a presentation, drawings pasted on the walls, a building model made with cardboard boxes, and them dressed in shirts too big that Clara had tried to adapt as builder uniforms. "Dad!" shouted Lucas, running to hug him. The word, which he had only started using 2 months ago, still made Richard's heart stop. "We want to show you our project," Matthew announced seriously. "Mom taught us to design buildings." For the next hour, Richard listened attentively as his 5-year-old sons explained basic architectural concepts Clara had taught them: foundations, loads, balance. They were simple concepts, adapted to children's minds, but the passion with which they spoke was contagious. Clara watched from the kitchen preparing dinner, and for the first time in all those months Richard saw something different in her eyes when she looked at him. Not distrust, not resentment, but something softer. Maybe it was not forgiveness yet, but it was a path towards it. A year and a half after that rainy dawn when everything began, Sterling and Vega Construction started its most ambitious project, a residential complex of social housing, 150 apartments specifically designed for low-income families, with all the amenities normally reserved for luxury developments. It was Clara's idea. "If we have really changed," she had argued at the board meeting, "then let us prove it. Let us build something for the people who need it most, and let us do it well, without cutting corners, without compromising quality." The project was financially risky. The profit margins would be minimal, but Richard approved it without hesitation. "Do it," he had said simply. "Design the building you would have needed when you were sleeping on my living room floor." Clara's design was revolutionary: efficient but dignified apartments with adequate heating in every space, high ceilings, large windows, common areas that fostered community. She included a daycare center on the ground floor, a community center, and a remote workspace equipped with computers and free internet. "Poor people do not need charity," Clara explained to the architects. "They need opportunities, spaces where they can grow, study, work, a real home." Construction began in the spring. Clara visited the site daily, supervising every detail, and she often took Matthew and Lucas with her. The children, now 6 years old, ran around the site in helmets too big, asking questions, learning. Richard was also there frequently, but not just as a supervising boss. He worked alongside the laborers, learned their names, listened to their stories. There was one in particular, an older man named Philip, who reminded him of something important every time they talked. "Mr. Sterling," Philip had told him one afternoon, "my daughter is your age. She is an accountant, but 3 years ago when she lost her job, she had to clean houses to survive. People treated her as if she were invisible, as if her university degree had been erased because she held a broom." Richard understood the message. How many Claras were in the world? How much talent wasted by prejudice, by circumstance, by the simple blindness of those in power. One October afternoon, when the building was already in the final phase, Richard found Clara alone on the top floor, looking at the city from the empty terrace. He approached silently and stood next to her. "It is beautiful," Clara said softly. "When this is finished, 150 families will have decent homes, children who will never sleep on cold floors, mothers who will not have the weight of tomorrow crushing them. You did it. We all did it. But yes," a sad smile crossed her face, "when I was sleeping in your living room with my children, I dreamed of this, of being able to change things. I never thought it would really happen." Richard wanted to say so many things. He wanted to apologize again for those 3 lost years. He wanted to thank her for not giving up, for continuing to be extraordinary even when the world treated her as ordinary. He wanted to tell her that he had fallen in love with her at some point during these months, seeing her strength, her intelligence, her unwavering kindness. But the right words did not come. Instead, he simply said, "The children are proud of you. I am too." Clara looked at him for a long time. "Do you know what is strange? I do not hate you anymore. I thought I always would. For ignoring us, for making us endure the cold, for all those years of indifference, but—" She paused, searching for words. "I see how you are now with Matthew and Lucas, how you never miss a visit, how you learned to braid Lucas's hair when he grew it out, how you help Matthew with math even though he is already better than you. I see how you change the company, how you treat people. And is that enough? I do not know if it is enough to forgive completely. The pain does not disappear just because someone changes, but a small smile appeared on her face. It is enough to have hope. The building's inauguration was on a sunny December morning, 2 years after that rainy dawn that changed everything. There was no pompous ceremony or politicians giving endless speeches. Richard had rejected all press offers, all invitations to make this a media event. "This is not for my ego," he had said firmly. "It is for them." Instead, the 150 families who would receive the apartments were invited to see their new homes. They arrived in small groups, some with old suitcases, others with just plastic bags containing all their belongings. There were single mothers like Clara had been, young couples starting out with babies in their arms, grandparents raising grandchildren, immigrants who had spent years looking for a decent place to put down roots. Clara walked through the hallways of the 3rd floor, accompanying a woman in her 40s named Sophia. She had 3 children and had spent the last 2 years living in a temporary shelter after escaping a domestic violence situation. "Is this mine?" Sophia looked at the apartment in disbelief. "All of this? All yours," Clara confirmed with a smile. 3 bedrooms, full kitchen, bathroom with a tub. And look, she turned the thermostat on the wall. "Heating in every room. You will never be cold again." Sophia covered her mouth with her hands, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. Her children ran in, shouting with joy as they discovered they would each have their own room. The woman turned to Clara, speechless, and simply hugged her. "I know what this means," Clara whispered, returning the hug. "I know exactly what it means." On the floor below, Richard helped an older man carry boxes. Philip, the same worker who had talked to him about his daughter, was moving in with his extended family. His accountant daughter, who had cleaned houses, his 2 grandchildren, and his wife, who had worked as a seamstress all her life. "I never thought I would live in a place like this," Philip said, his trembling hands touching the freshly painted walls. "I worked in construction for 40 years, putting up beautiful buildings for others. And now you have yours," Richard completed. "And it is an honor that you are part of this building." "Mr. Sterling," Philip paused, searching for words. "I heard the story, about how you changed, about the engineer who worked cleaning your house. My daughter told me that you now treat everyone with respect, that you visit the sites, that you ask for names. I should have always done it. The important thing is that you do it now. That is already a lot." The old man smiled warmly. "Past mistakes do not define who we are. What we do next does." Those words resonated with Richard as he continued helping the families. Every apartment that filled with life was a small redemption. Every smile of a child discovering their new home was a reminder of why this mattered. Matthew and Lucas were in the communal area on the ground floor, playing with other children who had just arrived. Richard watched them from the entrance, marveling at how his children, who had known cold and precariousness, now shared toys and laughter with other little ones who had lived similar experiences. There was no superiority in them, no judgment, just pure empathy. "They are good children," said a voice next to him. It was Clara, who had approached silently. "They look like their mother. They have something of their father too. Matthew has your stubbornness when he sets his mind to something, and Lucas has your way of tilting your head when you are thinking." Richard smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. "Do you remember when you told me that my actions were what counted, not my promises?" "I remember. I want to show you something." He took her hand and guided her toward the elevator. They went up to the rooftop, where they had been so many times during construction. But now there was something different. In a corner of the terrace there was a small newly planted garden. It was not elaborate, some hardy plants, a couple of young trees in large planters, simple wooden benches, but it was cared for with love. "The families who live here will be able to use this space," Richard explained, "for meetings, for celebrations, or simply to have a green place to breathe. But there is something special." He approached a bronze plaque installed on the wall. "Read." This, Clara approached and read aloud. "Clara Jones Building, built with the belief that every person deserves dignity, warmth, and a home. May no one ever sleep in the cold again." Tears instantly filled her eyes. "Richard, it was not my idea. It was the whole team's, James's, Monica's, the workers. Everyone wanted your name here, because this exists thanks to you, to your vision. to your refusal to accept that things have to be the way they have always been. Clara touched the plaque with trembling fingers. I never imagined, when I was sleeping in your living room, when I thought my life was over, I never imagined I would get here. I did not imagine I would get here either. Not this way. Not being the person I needed to be. Richard took a deep breath. Clara, there is something I need to tell you. Something I have rehearsed 1,000 times, but that always comes out wrong. It does not have to be perfect. These 2 years have been the most important of my life. Not because of the company's success, not because of this building, but because you taught me to see. You taught me that a person's value is not in their social position or their bank account. It is in their integrity, their strength, their ability to get up again and again. Clara listened to him in silence, her eyes shining with contained tears. I love how you are a mother, how you protect our children but also let them grow. I love how you are an engineer, how you never compromise safety for convenience. I love how you are human, how you treat every person with the same dignity, whether a director or a laborer. He paused. Clara, I love you, not out of gratitude, not out of guilt, but because you are the most extraordinary person I have ever met. The silence that followed was dense with emotion. Clara closed her eyes, letting the tears finally fall. For a long time I hated you, she said softly. I hated how you ignored us. I hated how you made me feel invisible. I hated that my children grew up without a father because you decided it was easier not to see. She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. But hatred is exhausting. And at some point, as I watched you change, as I watched you learn the names of every worker, as I watched you braid Lucas's hair with clumsy but patient hands, the hatred transformed into something different. Into what? Into hope. Into the possibility that people really can change, that past mistakes do not have to define the future. She took a step closer. I do not know if I can ever completely forget those 3 cold years. The scars are there, but a small smile lit up her face. I have decided that I want to try, to build something with you, not on guilt, not on compensation, but on conscious choice. Richard felt his heart expanding in his chest. Are you sure? I have survived worse things than the risk of trusting again, and our children deserve to see that their parents can be a real team. Clara extended her hand. But we have to be equal partners. In everything, in decisions, in parenting, in work. I will never be invisible to you again. Never again, Richard promised, taking her hand. And if I ever start to forget, you have permission to remind me, with all the force necessary. Oh, I will, you can be sure. They laughed together, a liberating laugh that dissolved years of tension. And for the first time since that night almost 5 years ago, when everything was confusing and complicated, they kissed. It was not a kiss of desperate passion, but of quiet promise, of a shared future, of 2 people who had gone through hell and decided to walk together towards something better. When they came down from the rooftop, they found Matthew and Lucas waiting for them in the lobby. The children ran toward them, and this time Richard did not hesitate. He knelt down and hugged them both tightly. Dad, Mom, asked Matthew with that characteristic seriousness, are you going to be together now, like a real family? Richard looked at Clara, who nodded with a smile. Yes, my love, like a real family. Good! Lucas jumped for joy. Because I already told my friends I had a dad and a mum, and I do not want them to think I lied. That night, after the last family had settled in, after the children fell asleep exhausted from playing so much, Clara and Richard sat on the balcony of her apartment, soon to be theirs, watching the illuminated building in the distance. There is something I never asked you, Richard said softly. When you were sleeping on my living room floor, what were you thinking about? What kept you going? Clara considered the question carefully. I was thinking about them, about Matthew and Lucas. I thought that maybe I had failed in many things, in my career, in choosing better, in protecting myself, but I was not going to fail them. They were going to grow up knowing that their mother fought, that she did not give up, that dignity is not lost by sleeping on a cold floor if you keep your integrity intact. You are the strongest person I know. I am not strong, I am just stubborn. A mischievous smile crossed her face. Something that, according to you, Matthew inherited. God help us when he grows up. They remained silent, enjoying the tranquility, the feeling that the pieces of their lives were finally fitting into their rightful place. It was not perfect. It never would be. but it was real, built on truth and choice. "Richard," Clara said after a long moment, "promise me something, anything, that when we build more buildings like that, and I know we will, you will never forget why we started. Not for public relations, not for awards, but because there are people sleeping on cold floors right now, invisible people, people who deserve to be seen. I promise, and this time I will make the actions back up the words." Clara rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture of trust that meant more than 1,000 declarations. "Then I am with you. To build not just buildings, but a world where no one has to choose between dignity and survival." And so, under the starry sky of Connecticut, two people who had started on opposite ends of the social scale, he with all the power, she with nothing except her integrity, found something money could never buy. A real connection, forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by the will to change. The Clara Jones building stood in the distance, its windows shining with the warm light of 150 new homes. And, somewhere in that steel and concrete structure, children slept without cold for the first time in their lives. Mothers rested without the weight of tomorrow crushing them. Families began to write new stories. Because sometimes, redemption does not come in a dramatic moment. It comes in consistent actions, in sustained changes, in the daily decision to be better than yesterday. It comes when we look at the invisible people and choose to see them, when we recognize that every human being, regardless of their job, position, or circumstances, deserves warmth, dignity, and the opportunity to build a future. And in that house they built together, on foundations of truth and responsibility, no one would ever sleep in the cold again.